Hi, everybody. We'll just wait 1 or 2 more minutes as people start joining the webinar. Good. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for this information session on the upcoming IGC call for proposals. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Tim Doberman. I'm the IGC Research Director, and we have several others from IGC who are with us today. So perhaps I'll have Shahid introduce himself, and Anam as well, and Aman.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Tim. Apologies, everyone, my camera isn't working. I'm Shahid Wazirali. I'm the head of the research program at the IGC. Along with me, we have Anam Anas, who's also the research and impact officer, and she'll be monitoring the chat box. So what we'd like to do over the next hour is just give you some details on the call for proposals that is currently open. We'll provide some tips on how to write a successful grant proposal, and then we'll have some time to answer some of your questions. So what we'll do is around 20 minutes of presentation, and then we will dedicate the rest of the time to answering your questions. So please don't hold back on any questions that you might have. Nothing is off the table, whether it's around the process that we use for evaluating proposals, types of awards, project timelines, whatever it may be. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we'll try to answer as many as we can. Just one other thing is at the end of the session, we'll be providing a link in the chat box and over email to you on providing feedback on the session. So this is really important for us. It'll help us sort of get a better understanding of what went well, what didn't go well, and so we can refine the webinar in upcoming calls. Can we go to slide 1? Yeah, so that's just an outline that I've just mentioned already. Next slide. So this is just basic information on the call. The call closes on the 30th of September, and we expect to make decisions and notify applicants in January. I would encourage you to go visit the website. It has a wealth of information, including resources for researchers who are interested in applying. It has guidelines for applicants, as well as links to our research strategy, our evidence papers. So yeah, it has a step-by-step guide on how to apply for the call. So yes, if anyone is actually interested in applying, I would strongly encourage you to carefully read through the main section on the call for proposals website, and then follow the steps carefully. On eligibility criteria, the call is open to any researcher worldwide that with a focus on economics or related social sciences. The lead PI must have a PhD or be pursuing a PhD, but other members of the team do not have to meet this criteria. We strongly encourage researchers based in IGC countries or low and middle income countries more broadly to apply to this call. We also strongly encourage mixed teams, so teams that include local researchers and researchers based in the sort of global north. And then, yeah, one of the key things that we're looking for is that research proposals need to align with our themes and our country priorities. And more information on our themes and our country priorities are available on our website. Next slide. So our preference is for projects to be located in IGC's 10 partner countries. These are countries where we have resident country teams that provide access to policymakers, access to data, and so on. So there's an advantage that comes with working in IGC countries, and our sort of historical analysis of data shows that the likelihood of achieving impact is much greater in IGC countries because of the infrastructure and the support that we provide there. But that's not to say that we don't accept proposals in non-IGC countries or other countries where we don't have a country team. We do, but proposals that are in other countries, so countries it might be China or Latin America, other middle-income countries, they must have relevance for IGC countries, and they must have a strong potential for academic impact. And the ability to generate new knowledge on informing policy on sustainable growth across developing countries more broadly. So they're subject to a higher bar. We offer two types of awards. So full research grants are fully self-contained research projects that will generate results that are appropriate for publication in an academic journal. So even if your project has a small budget and, for example, uses secondary data or admin data where the costs can be considerably lower, but the sample size is appropriately large to generate results that have statistical significance. So it's a fully self-contained research project. You should apply for the large grant, even if it's below the 20 or 30K threshold. Small grants are specifically for pilots and for exploratory work. So that is first step research to better understand an issue or to test an intervention before you plan to scale it up. So the small grant award is capped at 30K pounds, and large grants are capped at 125K. On our evaluation criteria, first up is alignment with our research strategy. So we're really looking for proposals that hit the mark in terms of addressing IGC's priorities. So that means your research question should closely align with what we've outlined in our research strategy and in our country priorities, and those documents are available online. So if you can clearly connect your project to these, you're on the right track. Next is the quality of your research design. If you just go back to the previous slide. Yeah, I'm just going to go through these criteria in a bit more detail. So the quality of your research design. So this is all about the academic rigor and how solid your research design is. We're looking for projects that aren't just interesting on paper, but that also have methods likely to yield valid and reliable results. Basically, we need to see that your project has the potential to produce high quality, credible findings. Then there's policy impact, equally important. Here we're assessing the potential for your project to have a real world impact. We want to know how important the policy target is and how engaged you are or how engaged you plan to be with relevant policymakers, both now and in the future. So the closer you are to influencing policy, the better. Academic impact is also crucial. This isn't just about producing new knowledge. It's also about significantly advancing the scientific understanding of your topic. We're interested in research that can contribute to the existing stock of knowledge and the literature in a meaningful way, and ideally something that could be published in a top-tier economic journal. We also value engagement with local institutions. We prioritize proposals that involve local researchers or institutions. So this could mean working with researchers embedded in a government ministry, partnering with a local institution, a local think tank. If you've already reached out to our country teams or have a track record of engaging with policymakers, that's a big plus. And yeah, I would strongly encourage all interested applicants to reach out to country teams, even at this sort of later stage of the open window, to get feedback on your proposals. And then finally, value for money. We need to ensure that your budget is realistic, cost effective. We'll be asking ourselves questions like, is your budget proportional to the task that you're proposing? Could the same results be achieved for less? And are your costs reflective of local market rates. So yeah, it's important to demonstrate that your project offers good value for money for the amount of budget that you're requesting. These are kind of the main things we'll be looking at when evaluating your proposals. So please keep these criteria in mind as you're putting together your proposal, and I think you'll be setting yourself up for success. Next slide. So I'll just quickly go through our research priorities before then handing on to Tim. I think the best thing for you to do is to just go to our website and read through the list of priorities in detail. But from our perspective, I mean, we look at it as, countries are facing significant challenges, especially low and middle income countries, working to raise living standards, reduce poverty, create jobs, and then, all the while ensuring that growth is environmentally sustainable and resilient to climate shocks. So these are all very sort of complex, intertwined tasks, and that's where we think our research plays, a crucial role. So our main goal is to promote sustainable and inclusive economic growth. We're focused on understanding, what the drivers of growth are, and identifying effective policies that can help countries develop in ways that enhance well-being, whether it be social well-being or environmental well-being, economic well-being. We're interested in all of those things. But we're particularly interested in projects that address environmental challenges across our key themes. And we strongly encourage research on strategies for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So what exactly do we work on? We work on 4 themes. The first is firms, trade, and productivity. Here we're looking at how to increase productivity by, improving firm operations, enhancing market efficiency, and promoting, global market engagement. We're also keen on promoting green innovation and ensuring that firms are resilient to climate shocks. The next theme is state effectiveness, where here we're focused on, how can we help governments become more effective in delivering inclusive and sustainable growth. Then there's cities. Urban areas are rapidly expanding, especially in developing countries. And we're exploring how to make cities more productive and more inclusive, while at the same time managing the challenges of urban density. And then with climate change accelerating urbanization, ensuring city resilience is also a key focus. And then finally, energy and environment. So we're interested in research looking at access to, reliable, cost-efficient energy, but also into transitioning to clean energy to reduce environmental harm. So there's a lot more detail in our research strategy. We have, things broken down by sub-theme and then sub-theme as well. So I would encourage everyone to look at that. They're very valuable resources, and they're full of insights that can, significantly inform and guide your research. I'll stop there, and I'll pass on to Tim now to just go through a few tips on how to write a strong grant proposal.
Great, thank you, Shahid, and please keep the questions coming. I won't tell you how many questions we answered in our first open day of last month, but we are still quite a way from that. So I would like to just give a very few high-level tips on when you're preparing your proposal, and this is based on our experience on what makes a successful proposal from IGC. So next slide, please. So this is not a complete blueprint on what makes a good proposal, but these are just some of my personal views on having reviewed several proposals before. And I think the first 3 bullets are extremely important, and they're the most important aspects to consider very deeply when you're preparing your proposal. The first is that a compelling proposal will always have a clear and precise research question. So you do not want a vague research question that is so broad that we can't really answer it in a convincing way. And we want to have a research question that will allow us to come up with a methodology that is suitable and convincing. And to give some I'll go into some examples in a moment, perhaps, but really think very carefully about what your precise research question is. Maybe you can have 2 questions if they're very related, but do not come with a list of 5 research questions. Think carefully about 1 research question make it clear so we know when we read your question, we should be able to know exactly all of the elements that are in your proposal. We should know the context, so the setting, so the country, or maybe this is in a rural area, or maybe this is targeting female entrepreneurs. We should know that your proposal is looking to ask about the role of a particular program. So for instance, financial literacy. Have it very focused and clear. And I think that will help structure your proposal, but also your arguments, and help the evaluator, the reviewer, have a clear sense of what you're trying to answer. The second aspect that we want to see is that your proposal expands our understanding on a particular topic, which you've identified in your research question. And even if this is only done in a very small way. Now, we would love to fund Nobel Prize winning ideas. I don't think we've done that just yet. But really, the reality is that knowledge tends to grow incrementally. And we have, and we expect that your proposal makes a contribution in a small way, maybe taking a new program and applying it to a new setting and generating new understanding about the mechanisms through which cash transfers might impact a local economy. Whatever it may be, we want to see that you're contributing to our knowledge base on a topic. So this is really, in some sense, an academic contribution. The third thing is a convincing and feasible methodology. So convincing in the sense that, are you able to answer the research question which you have laid out? And feasible meaning, feasible is whether you're able to answer the research question you've laid out. And convincing is whether we think the methodology you've identified will enable us to understand potentially a causal mechanism, or to understand the relationship between a program and an outcome, whether that might be early childhood education on future labor market outcomes for children who benefit from them. So this methodology is flexible. We are happy to fund experiments. We're happy to fund regression-based, so kind of desk-based work that's using different regression techniques like instrumental variables. We're happy to fund mixed methods research. We're happy to fund modeling or structural work. All of that is fine, as long as the methodology that you indicate in your proposal is really going precisely towards answering the research question that you lay out. The other aspect, I'm jumping now to the bottom actually, is that you should have a very structured and organized proposal. And this is maybe a small point to make, but visually, in practice, we'll be reviewing hundreds of proposals. And so really use the proposal form as to your advantage. So really break out sections. So have my research question is in one clear line, one line for your research question, make that very visible. Use headers like, context, data, intervention, or methodology, model, whatever. Use these section titles in your text to really break it out and allow the reviewer to really have a sense of what you're trying to do. And then the last thing I'd like to say is just common features that some compelling proposals have, but not all of them must have this. Often a good proposal that gets funded by IGC tends to bring in novel data. So maybe it's using a new type of data set that has previously not been used, whether that comes from administrative data from the government, or maybe it's a private company that's been collecting data or using mobile money data in a new way to trace out interactions in an economy. Maybe it's remote sensing or satellite data. Maybe it's data based on ecology. All of these aspects are interesting and are worth highlighting. Many proposals that are successful also have very strong partnerships with government or important stakeholders. So they're working hand in hand with the government to evaluate or implement an intervention, or to understand the impacts of a policy. This gives us confidence in your ability to get access to necessary information and data to answer your research question, but also lets us know that you have a great pathway to impacting and influencing policy. And the very last point is don't be afraid to be ambitious. We like to see big, bold ideas and exciting projects, even if that means coming with risks. And others have said this, and I'll copy the line, which is that, funding research is a bit like venture capital, and we accept that some projects will not succeed. As long as you're transparent about the risks, that's fine. So what I want to now do is go on to just one or two quick examples of a good research question, and then we can switch to some frequently asked questions and have a wider kind of open chance to respond. A good research question is this, for example: what is the impact of vocational training on youth employment in urban Ghana? It's focused because it targets a clear intervention, which is vocational training. It's focused on a specific group, youth in urban Ghana, and the outcome is very clear: employment. Obviously, it's policy relevant because we know youth unemployment is a huge challenge. It's very clear, and that's clear. And the value of this clarity and precision is that the answer to this question immediately is policy relevant. If we find that vocational training programs lower youth unemployment, then this is immediately some policy evidence we can use to have a discussion to perhaps inform policy in the future. And it therefore builds on kind of an existing research literature and can perhaps boost our understanding of how these types of programs might have impacts in Ghana. Next slide, please. So what I'll now give an example of is, bad is maybe a not nice word. So let's say a less good example of a research question. And this is not because this question is not important. So how can education improve economic development in Africa? In many ways, this is one of the most fundamental things for development: education, human capital. So it's not that this is not important, it's just that this question is very broad and unfocused. And because of that, it doesn't have the policy relevance in the sense of what precisely would we learn from trying to answer this question, because it's such a big question, we can't actually concretely answer it. So we don't know, what do we mean by education? Is this primary education, secondary education, tertiary education? What do we mean by economic development? Are we thinking about labor market outcomes? Are we thinking about other aspects? As we all know, Africa is very diverse, and the impact of a particular education program can be very different in South Africa versus in Ghana versus in Malawi. And so in this regard, this big question fails the test of a good research question, not because it's not important and meaningful, but because it's broad, and it does not allow us to come up with a methodology that can convincingly answer this question that in a way that would remove any kind of what we'd call confounding factors or other relationships between variables that would prevent us from understanding the channels through which education influences economic outcomes. Next slide, please. So the final thing I want to go into now is on methodology and design. These are just a few other points which I'll say briefly, and then we'll open up for wider Q&A. So as I've said, we are very flexible in methodology. This does not need to be an RCT or an experiment. It can be based on collecting data. It can be based on doing regressions, etc. And we've funded proposals of all of these types over the past several years. Next slide, please. So when you are talking about your methodology and design, I have 3 or 4 points that I want to emphasize. First, when you're talking about data collection, be very clear on what data you're collecting, how you're collecting this, who your sample is, and how you will be measuring your outcome variables. Don't just say we will conduct 1,000 household surveys. Tell us what the modules in your survey questionnaire might be. Tell us you'll be asking about expenditure, asset ownership, time of use, whatever. Tell us what your outcome is. If you're saying your outcome is financial literacy, How will you measure financial literacy? Are you going to do a test? Or is this going to be scored based on an exam? Let us know very clearly what you are measuring. Talk about the sample that you are using for your study. Does this sample reflect the average population in an area? Is it a particular subsample that is not representative? That may be fine, but it's good to think about what that means for your ability to answer your research question, as well as for our ability to learn something more general about the wider population. If you're doing an experiment, be very clear and detailed what the experiment or the program or the intervention is actually doing. So don't just say, we provide skills training. Tell us what types of skills training you're providing. And give examples and be very clear on how this training might be helpful in impacting the outcome that you're trying to measure. Next slide, please. When you're doing a regression, and I don't want to sound too much like a lecturer here, but be very clear about the assumptions of your empirical approach and be very honest and straightforward about them. So you can say, to answer my research question, I will run a regression of A on B with this type of setup. Maybe it's an instrumental variable or something like that. Be very clear under which conditions this approach will allow us to actually learn the effect of A on B. And tell us under which conditions it might fail. That type of transparency is completely fine. You will not lose points in that. And if anything, it shows us that you're thinking quite critically about your approach. So the best thing would be to say that I will take this approach. This approach may not hold if the following aspects or following features are present. To check whether this is indeed an issue, I will then further collect data on this and that to see if these conditions are met for my approach to be empirically valid. That type of reasoning is extremely valuable and is only very, very positively received. And the same point applies for any type of modeling work you might be doing. Next slide. I think we are at the frequently asked questions now. So Shahid, should I just do a couple of these, or do you want to come in with some of your thoughts?
Yeah, why don't you start off and then I can come in.
So the slides will be shared with everyone who's interested, so that is no problem. And please do post your questions into the Q&A box, not in the main webinar chat. That makes it easier for us to monitor. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so these are some questions which we've already gotten today, which I should say are all answered on our website. So for many of the questions, the first point of call is the website. We have lots of resources for researchers and those who are interested in applying. And so that should be your first point of departure. As Shahid has mentioned, we require one of the PIs, the lead PI, to have a PhD. But beyond that, we are quite open in terms of requirements for researchers. That can be a single team, it can be several people. They can all be based in the US, they can all be based in Kenya, they can be based all over. They do not all need to be economists. One can be an economist, another can be an ecologist, the other can be a political scientist. That's completely fine. PhD students are strongly encouraged to apply. And of course, we are extremely interested in receiving proposals from researchers who are based at kind of local universities in an IGC country or at a similar research center in an IGC country. The research does not have to be on an IGC partner country. It can be conducted in any developing country, but you should note that, put it this way, if your proposal is on Kazakhstan, not because it's not interesting, but we have, let's say, less money available to fund for non-IGC country projects. So we will still consider it, and we do fund projects that are not in IGC countries, but let's say the competitive bar or the academic standard will be slightly higher for these projects. So keep that in mind. We do emphasize, and this applies to research across all themes. So you're able to, for instance, apply for a project on firms in India. But for some of our countries, we have a specific thematic emphasis. So in India, for example, we strongly are emphasizing research that touches on themes of sustainability and climate change. So we would really encourage those who are submitting from India to consider this when they're applying. But again, if you have your dream project on firms and trade in India, it has nothing to do with sustainability, we still encourage you to submit, but please be aware that this will be evaluated in kind of a more competitive set, because the standard will be higher, because the amount of money in this space would be more limited. So we do not fund direct projects on health and education if that is the sole focus of the paper. We are very much in support of projects which look at how education or health interventions might affect economic outcomes. For example, I gave the example of early childhood education programs on future labor market outcomes. Wonderful. We would be very interested in projects like that. Next slide, please. So we are happy to do multiple countries in one go. There's a bit of a trade-off, remember. Think about what I was saying regarding the research question. Some questions inherently require studying multiple countries. Maybe the focus is on trade. But you should think carefully, if you're expanding the scope of your project to cover many countries, that your methodology and design and research question, above all else, should be still suitable to do that. So don't just think about, what we're not interested in is like a cross-country review on certain things. So really the more macro you go, the more macro your methodology and approach should be. So the managing institution can be based in the country of research. It can also be based at a university abroad. That is up to you. And the same applies for any researchers or PIs and co-PIs. They can be based outside of the country of research. They can be based inside. And indeed, we strongly encourage mixed teams of having PIs internationally and PIs locally as well. We do not only do RCTs. Whether you apply for a large or small grant is in some ways up to you. The smaller grants are seen as emphasizing more exploratory and piloting work. But when we assess the grants, we kind of really look at the full picture and the potential for this to develop into something larger and impactful. On paying fees for researchers, so if you are a faculty member at a university in Europe or the US or Canada or Australia, then we will not pay fees for you. We do pay some fees for PhD students, but we also recognize that the research environment is very different in countries, in IGC countries, in Africa or in Asia. And in that regard, we are fine to include fees for researchers in these countries, though I will note that we do take value for money seriously when we evaluate our proposals. So if it's a proposal which is effectively only fees and very little else, that will not be seen as having good value for money. So think in terms of striking the right balance, in terms of having fees as well as having other research costs in your budget. Next slide. That is the end of the script. What I suggest we do now is Shahid, please come in if there's any other points that you'd like to raise explicitly, or Anam, if there's something that's been coming up consistently in the chat. Otherwise, what we can do is open it up for any questions. And if there are no questions, I will just also be answering things live.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things that I mentioned earlier, but I want to re-emphasize that. One is in engaging with the country team prior to submitting the proposal. So it's really important that, especially if it's an IGC country, that you reach out to the country team to get their feedback. This will significantly improve your chances in the evaluations of proposals. If it is in a non-IGC country, then you should reach out to us directly at the London hub. The email addresses are provided on the website and in the application guidance. But the more feedback you get, the higher the likelihood of your proposal being successful. The second point I want to reiterate is on reading through the research strategy, not so much for understanding what our thematic focus areas are, although that is important, but it has a great list of example research questions that flow after each section, after each written section. So if you're wondering how to structure your research question or what an appropriate research question is for this idea that you have in your head, the research strategy is a great guide for that. So are the 4 evidence papers that we have put up on the website as well. So that can give you a really good direction on how to structure a research question, because we have a bunch of examples up there. The third and final point I'll make is on, I'm getting a few questions around qualitative research. We generally do not fund research that is purely qualitative. So keep that in mind when you're preparing your proposals. We want a quantitative component. Mixed methods is fine, but purely qualitative will generally not go.
Yeah, and just to add, I think, look, we'll be very honest. We are an economics biased organization. So what I mean by that is we are a little biased towards the more conventional methodologies that economists use. So that means there's a great emphasis on things like measurement and causality. So that's not to say that we don't think mixed methods or qualitative methods are important. I think if anything, we see that increasingly as being extremely important. So, but we don't think that that alone would be sufficient. So let me give a concrete example. In your proposal, if you say, we want to test a certain program, to think about how to design the program, we first want to do a series of focus groups and have kind of more qualitative interviews. These focus groups will then feed into the design of this treatment and feed into a baseline survey, which then is used to quantitatively measure how this program is impacting or affecting the lives of those who benefit from it. That is extremely good. So we'd like to see that. So we'd encourage explicitly mentioning these things, but it's just in isolation, focus groups only would be unlikely to be successful. Yeah. And so there's a couple of questions on like managing institutions. So these can be public institutions, they can be private institutions. So it can be a private company that handles the grant in a certain country. Though obviously, again, we do emphasize value for money. So, overheads are capped, and we don't have much flexibility to go beyond standard overheads. And you can see more of these requirements in our kind of budget guidelines. IGC there will be one institution manages the grants. We do not, only in extremely rare cases, but we effectively require one one grant managing institution. So we would not send separate contracts from IGC to different PIs or to different institutions. We would strongly prefer that one institution takes the full IGC grant. So a government ministry can apply. I will be clear that it is difficult to find. If there's fees, that is not something we can pay. So we cannot pay fees for government staff, but we were certainly happy to support government work. For instance, if it means doing surveys, etc. We would strongly encourage that there's also then interaction with local research centers or institutions to do this work as well. But we do fund government work as well. Yes, we can take studies that use panel data and time series. Again, the key thing is whether your approach is suitable to give us a convincing answer to your research question. So we can't fund PhDs, but this can be used. As I said, we can fund PhD students, and you can use that funding to help pay for fees or cost of living. That is fine, again, within reason. Yes, local think tanks can be managing institutions. Teaching buyouts, just to be very clear, we can pay a PhD student if you are in the US, if you are in Tanzania, that is fine. This can be considered a teaching buyout, whatever, but that is fine. Again, this is for PhD students. Yes, so we can support government to collect data. The trickier question is who's managing the grant, and perhaps we can have, that is something we could handle if you are successful about the right body to manage the grant. But we can support government work, and we have supported government research before. If you are a PhD student, you do not need to list your supervisor as a co-PI, but please note you should check with your own university's rules and regulations. For instance, here at LSE, you do have to list your supervisor as a PI, but this will depend on the university. No, IGC does not cover the fees for journal article submission. So there's a question about, I have multiple stakeholders, and who should I emphasize? So emphasize whatever stakeholder you think is the most important for your work. So naturally, you might be involving government or NGOs. It's okay to pick one. In your written response, you'll be able to indicate that, okay, I have close partnerships with the government, but I'm also working very closely with these other NGO or private sector partners. And so you'll have the space to be able to elaborate on that.
I just want to comment on one question, Tim. Someone asked a good question, which is on if it's an exploratory project, is purely qualitative fine? And I think for those types of projects, yes, they're okay. That's okay to go purely qualitative, especially if you're doing purely exploratory work where you're meeting with a group of policymakers or a group of beneficiaries to understand an intervention better or to understand an issue better. And there's no pilot component to it, and it's interviews with officials or whatever it is. In that case, yes, I mean, you don't have to put in a quantitative component because it just doesn't make sense. So for purely exploratory research, just going qualitative is fine.
Yeah, so maybe let me expand on that. So the most important thing is if you're submitting an exploratory study, the key thing then is to emphasize why this space is extremely interesting and important, not only for policy reasons, but for academic reasons. So, perhaps we need to really understand why people do or do not migrate into cities as much as they could or should. And to better understand this, we want to do, as Shahid was saying, some more qualitative oriented work. That's fine. These would naturally be much smaller. But the key thing we will then be looking for is, can you give an indication of how this qualitative work could then feed into something in the future that could take shape of something that's more quantitative? So I would suggest that you outline, as I've given an earlier example, this is exploratory. I will start with this qualitative assessment and then say, I anticipate with my findings, obviously you don't know what their findings are yet. You will then say, I anticipate with these findings that I will use this to feed into a survey, which will better measure this, or to feed into a potential program that will target some of these things that have come out of these qualitative interviews. So really just lay out the vision, even though that vision will naturally change as you do the work. Noted, we will think about how to prepare a kind of project proposal writing workshop, but as Shahid has mentioned, I would suggest learning by doing is one of the best ways, and you can also learn by example. And so on our website, you see examples of what we consider kind of very successful or high quality proposals. And I think many of the elements that I've talked about today will be found in these examples. So please encourage you to look at these examples that we have online. It's completely fine. So sometimes we do have country-specific priorities, which are coming from our policy engagements in IGC countries. It's completely fine if your research does not overlap exactly with the priorities that these countries have. So you will not be scored down if that is the case. So this is really just trying to help indicate some areas where we are particularly interested in funding research. But if your project falls outside of the country research priorities, we would still encourage you to apply. But even better than that, we would encourage you to speak with the country team, indicate your interest, have them feed into your proposal and think about how they can help develop that with you, and then submit your project. So we can pay incentives as part of experiments, yes. Though note that we again can't go overboard. So I think there will be naturally a limit probably on the size, but I think if it's a small experiment or pilot, we can definitely pay incentives. To answer Laura's question, which I think Shahid is typing, I think I've lost it now, but yes.
Sorry, I just no, I just said that yes, that could qualify for a pilot.
So I think Laura's question was kind of not just the kind of the opposite of the qualitative thing, where it's like we want to do quantitative or measurement work to then potentially design an RCT in the future. So we need to first understand like the baseline to think about what a potential intervention might look like, and that would be definitely suitable for an exploratory grant. The proposal submission is online, and you'll find the links to that on our website. So it is not via email. We do factor in diversity, and that's important for us when we review proposals. And we are actually reaching the end. So yeah, on the question of, so I have so imagine I'm partnering with the government, perhaps to do an experiment. Maybe it's not an experiment. I'm just partnering with the government to evaluate a policy. How essential is it to submit a letter of support? We definitely want to see evidence that you have a strong working relationship with the counterpart. Again, this could be the NGO, this could be the government, this could be your private sector partner. This is necessary because, again, we want to just get an assessment of your ability to actually implement what you're writing in your proposal. If you can say we have an MOU, or if you can demonstrate a letter of support, this will be seen positively, and will help us get confidence in your ability to execute on the proposal. So please do mention these things when you do have them. There's no limit to the number of people who can be on a proposal. Um, I myself have been on a proposal with at least 5 or 6 people. Um, I mean, again, I'll say we're not quite a pure science discipline where we'll have 30 co-authors. I would not suggest you do this. But we recognize that in economics, it's increasingly becoming much more co-author based, much more team based. And so there's no limit on that. Um, so you do not need to state like a plan for submitting to journals. We know that this can take a long time. We don't need to see when you anticipate to submit to a journal. Obviously, you'll need to put a timeline for the project in terms of, okay, when we collect data for this period, we'll then need a few more months to do the in-house analysis. We then need to do another month or two to prepare the paper. So blah, blah. So there will be a timeline you need to include for the IGC proposal, because you'll have final deliverables like a report or a draft working paper that you need to submit to us. But how that translates to when you submit the paper, that's up to you. So you don't need to identify that. So if you are doing an RCT, even preliminary power calculations can be useful. We understand that, especially if it's a pilot, you won't be able to really do that, at least at the full extent. But it's good to indicate even small things like, okay, I want to send letters to potential people reminding them to file your taxes. So there's a large literature on these types of tax evasion letters, and we have a good sense that, the effect of sending a letter might have this percentage point impact on tax revenues. So that will help frame the potential size of the treatment effect from your program. And so pulling in examples like this, or even doing some really back of the envelope power calculations is only a good thing. But I should say, even if it is a pilot, for instance, we don't require that fully. So it's kind of up to you. If you think you can bring in relevant information that'll help us assess that, please do. Yeah, so most common output is that we would have some form of draft working paper. In many ways, this is like a final report, but I should make clear that you can indicate that you want to keep this confidential. So if kind of the working paper itself is very initial and it closes out your exploratory grant, that's fine, and we wouldn't publish it. But that's something where we do have a degree of flexibility on for exploratory work, yes. So in almost all cases, the researchers do have some institutional affiliation. In some ways, it's not an explicit requirement. So if you are an independent researcher, we can consider that. But it would really kind of depend on the nature of what you're looking to do. So we don't have time to go into it, but it's kind of logistically more complicated to do large contracts with individuals, especially if these things will require, for instance, survey costs, because with an individual, it's on a reimbursement basis. So you would have to fund the cost and then you can claim it from us. And that's a very big drawback if you are looking to do large surveys. So we would encourage you to have an institutional partner wherever that is possible. We do not have an explicit budget cap, but I will say that usually the largest proposals we fund are in the order of £100,000. So again, there's no explicit rule, but that is usually the largest. And Shahid and Anam can come in with the averages, but I think the average will probably be maybe 50 or 60,000, perhaps even lower.
Yeah.
So
That's
those
about right. So yeah, I think the average is about 60, and like Tim said, we wouldn't go above 100K generally. I think we should wrap up. We should wrap up now. We're on time. If there are other, I mean, questions are constantly coming in, but a lot of these questions can be answered if you just went onto our website and read through the application guidance, and everything that's on the website should answer all of these questions. So I can't reiterate this enough. Please carefully go through the website. There's 4 or 5 different sub pages. Go through every one of them, and that will set you up. The more time you spend on the website, the more time you spend with the documents on the website, the higher your chances will be of successfully submitting. Just one final thing from me is on the feedback survey. So Anam has just put up a link. Oh no, that's to the guidance. Oh no, there's a survey link there as well in the webinar chat. So please take 5 minutes after this call while your memory is fresh to answer the survey. I would like to say that answering the survey will impact the ability of your funding to get awarded, but that's not the case. But it will give us a lot of useful information to refine these webinars and put out information in a better way for you. So it will help you ultimately. So please, yeah, we would really appreciate if you did that. Spend 5 minutes after the webinar.
Great, thank you, everybody. And we've at least crossed the 200 answered questions mark. So that's good to see. Thank you. And yeah, we look forward to all of your proposals. So thank you.